Good evening all and welcome to tonight's Scary Stories in the Rain. I do hope you enjoy. I would also like to let you know that the fifth story in this video is exceptionally long, and with good reason. It is a fantastic story that will leave you horrified, so be sure to listen to the end. And have you ever wondered how much of your personal information is floating around on the internet? Go ahead, do a quick search of your name and see what comes up. Scary, isn't it? To know your private info is out there for sale to the highest bidder? Data brokers sell your info to scammers, your full name, email, even your health records. But even in the darkest corners of the web, there is some hope. A sanctuary amongst the chaos called Aura, the sponsor of today's video, which shows me which data brokers sell my information and automatically submit opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only reduces the amount of spam I get, but protects me from hackers who could use the info to access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Did you hear about the AT&T breach with over 73 million records being released? Scary, isn't it? They recommend strong passwords, but Aura does more. And for less. No need for multiple apps. With Aura you get comprehensive protection at a fraction of the cost, and if your information was compromised at the AT&T data breach, you can rest easy knowing that Aura is always on your side. I value my privacy, and yours, so follow the link on screen or in the description to start your 2-week free trial. Your data deserves to be protected. Me and my dad have always been into dirt bikes and off-roading vehicles. Almost every night you could find us on our phones looking on Craigslist and various other websites for a good deal on a dirt bike. One night we both had the idea of looking on Letgo, so quickly we both downloaded the app. While we were both searching for a motorcycle, my dad stumbled across an amazing steal. It was a 250cc dirt bike for only $750, which is really good, considering that brand new went for about $1,500. My dad offered the man $600 instead, and without hesitation the man accepted, which sent up a red flag for me. I told my dad that it didn't really seem right, as the price was exceptionally low, but he didn't seem to care, and I guess he just really wanted a bargain. There were no visible problems with the bike, so his heart was set in stone, and he went that night to pick up the bike, and I came along with him. On the original listing, the address for the pickup was just down the road about 5 minutes away, but the seller messaged us and told us to meet him in the parking lot about 20 minutes away, which at the time we didn't seem to take note of. As we were driving out to the location, things started getting weird. When the man now changed his mind on that location and told us to meet him at his house, in a part of town that isn't the best, which is about an hour away from our house. This is when I started to worry, but my dad was trying to save money, so we went anyway. Once we arrived in his neighborhood, we quickly realized that there were no street lights, and with it being about 10 p.m, it was feeling a little sketchy. We were driving through the neighborhood looking for the address, but the house numbers just simply didn't exist. It seemed that it was skipped. So my dad, being determined, he parked and started messaging the seller. Deep down inside, I was freaking out. Once we were parked, 2 sketchy-looking vans filled with 2 men pulled up, one in front of us, one behind us. I quickly realized what was happening, but my dad didn't, as his eyes were still attracted to his phone. My heart sank as I saw the doors open and sketchy-looking men dressed in all black emerged and were staring at us as if they were planning something. My dad was still messaging the seller, and the text went something like this: "Hey, we're here at the location, but can't find the house number." "I know, I gave you a fake address. I don't want people knowing exactly where I live. I'll be out there now." Once I saw the text, I nudged my dad's arm to grab his attention and said, "This isn't right. It's sketchy. I think it's a setup," and pointed to the vans. And that is when my dad realized and we left. We pulled out of the neighborhood and thought we were safe, but quickly realized that one of the cars that we were parked next to in the neighborhood was following us. Luckily, it was a long drive home, and that meant a lot of time to lose them. We were driving for what seemed like forever, and we finally lost the other car. Once we lost them, I began explaining to my dad that it was a setup, and they were probably going to rob us, or even worse. Luckily, we got home safely, but it could have ended badly. A few nights later, while eating dinner with some family, we had the news in the background, and what we saw made me sick to my stomach. We saw on the news that a man was robbed and killed while buying a motorcycle off the same app, in that same neighborhood. I felt sick when I heard that. That could have been us. We could have been killed and robbed. Ever since that incident, I deleted that app, and frankly haven't felt safe using another app like it since. This happened to my sister and I when we were very young. I was 11 and my little sister was 6. I'm 65 years old now, and this has been the scariest thing that ever happened to me in my life. My parents had been painting our living room and kitchen. Newspaper had been put up to the windows so that no paint dripped on the glass. Around 5 o'clock the phone rang. My mother answered, and it was the neighbor down the street inviting my parents over to theirs to play poker. I remember my mother saying that she would have loved to, but that they didn't have a babysitter. That's when I piped up and said, "Mum, I'll babysit, I'm almost 12. I know how to be responsible." My parents discussed it between themselves and decided it would be okay. They left the neighbor's phone number in the kitchen and they left. Well, no sooner were they out the door that me and my sister ran into my parents' bedroom and started jumping on the bed. We weren't supposed to be in there, but that made it all the more fun. We were jumping and laughing and giggling. I wasn't being very responsible at all. I remember suddenly smelling cigarette smoke wafting through my parents' open window, as we had a very large peach tree in the front yard. I looked out of the window at first and didn't see anything because of the peach tree, and then I saw the glow of the tip of the cigarette and the faint outline of a man. I grabbed my sister and told her to be quiet. I pulled down the shade, but the window was still open. Suddenly I heard some scratching on the screen of the window. I pulled the shade out of the way, and right there was a man's face. He reeked of cigarettes and his eyes were green. He wore a little beanie-type hat and said, "Looks like you two are having a lot of fun. Why don't you let me in? I'd love to jump on the bed with you." Oh my God. I remember grabbing my sister and telling her to be as quiet as possible. "Come on, open the door, we'll have some fun," he said. I froze. I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed and couldn't get off the bed. I started shaking violently from head to toe, my teeth chattering like I was caught in a snowstorm. My sister began to cry. She had her little hands over her mouth trying to stifle the cries. I knew I had to get to the telephone in the kitchen, but that would mean walking down the hall through the living room and then into the kitchen. Back then, we had a rotary dial phone. Right then the doorbell began to ring, and ring, and ring, and the man was pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. He tried the knob back and forth while ringing the doorbell, and I grabbed my sister's hand, and we started slowly walking down the hall. We had to walk past the front door. He was still there ringing the doorbell, shaking the doorknob, demanding to be let in. By then my sister was crying out loud. I couldn't stop shaking, it was horrible. We made it to the living room, and he started banging on the windows of the living room. We couldn't see him because they were covered in newspaper. He laughed, saying, "Little pig, let me in." Finally, we reached the kitchen. I found the paper with the neighbor's phone number on it, and if you've ever used a rotary phone, it takes forever to dial a number. You have to wait for the rotary to return before you can dial a new digit. I was shaking so badly I could barely dial at all. Suddenly he was there at the kitchen window, pounding and laughing, demanding to be let in, insisting he wasn't going to hurt us. I grabbed my sister, picked her up, only to realize she had diarrhea running down her legs. She was so afraid. I carried her downstairs to the basement. It was unfinished, so that was scary to begin with, and we huddled in the far corner. Suddenly, There he was at the back door, rattling the doorknob, pounding and pounding again. We stayed huddled in that corner crying. I don't remember much after that. I do remember the door opening and thought he'd come in, but thankfully it was my parents. They ran down to the basement and scooped us up and asked us what happened. We were both so afraid that we could barely get any words out. I remember my dad running around the back door looking for the man. He went all around the block but never saw anyone. Our mum gave us both baths and warm milk and put us to bed. We never found out who the man was. That happened so many years ago, and I still think about it often to this day. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had opened that door. My boyfriend John and I went to hang out with his friend Mike and his current girlfriend. She knew about a party that was going on with some of her childhood friends who had just finished high school. We arrived to the middle of nowhere, and a bunch of people were hanging out in the front yards of a few homes, drinking beer and just chilling. It was very strange to me, and we felt out of place. People were whispering about us and pointing at us, I assume because it was a small town and everyone knew each other. Some of the other boys started mocking my boyfriend's shirt, a Lacoste polo. "You a rich boy, huh? You think you're better than us or something?" My boyfriend was not rich. He got a lot of hand-me-downs from his boss after he gained a few pounds, but we just laughed it off. After a little bit of standing around, someone decided we should go into a friend's house who had a pool. We all followed, thinking someone's actual home might be less strange than just hanging out in front of random yards. When we arrived, there were some girls in the pool fully clothed. They seemed nice enough, just drunk. Some people were hanging out outside the driveway. I have a prosthetic leg, so I get tired if I stand for too long, and I sit on the back of the truck. After a while, a dude approaches us and sits down next to me. I was pretty naive at the time. I never received much attention from boys. I grew up in a small town in a different state. We were in Georgia, I grew up in Texas. The dude started telling us he was from New York and asking me questions about my life. It was then he put his hands on my knee and made a comment about my looks, saying I was cute or whatever. My boyfriend was there, and I felt safe enough to not react, but my blood was boiling. I shrugged his comment off and laughed. I tried to act uninterested, but I was frozen in an uncomfortable state of weirdness. John is watching, waiting for me to say something, which I didn't. I don't know why, I didn't like the attention. When he began moving his hand up my thigh, I said, "Yeah, I'm not interested. That's my boyfriend right there." "Oh, well, that's okay. Doesn't seem to mind." His hand was about to get to my crotch when my boyfriend grabbed him by the throat and said, "Get your hands off her." He started to get scared and was apologizing when someone ran out of the woods and tackled my boyfriend. It was the owner of the home. He had been passed out in his truck for the past 4 hours, but had come to see a complete stranger choking out his friend. 3 guys ran up on him. He managed to fight 2 of them off, but the host of the party had him in a headlock. He held him down until he almost lost consciousness. They fell to the ground with the host on top of him, pressing down on his throat and cutting off his ability to breathe. I tried to hit him and beat him off, but he had a glazed look over his eyes and seemed determined to finish the job. I laid in on him, digging my prosthetic knee into his back. John's friend was nowhere to be seen. The host finally let him off and we ran to our car. Mike and his girlfriend were close behind, obviously aware of what was happening the whole time. The next morning, the white of John's eyes were all red and full of blood. I genuinely believed he almost died. We decided to go to the cops. This was in a place called Rockdale County, a backwards, nasty country town. I didn't realize how terrible it was until we were inside the sheriff's office. They claimed they had gotten a report that I was taking my leg off and beating people with it, which isn't physically possible. They said the only way we could press charges was if we all went to jail because it was all hearsay, and the cops knew the attacker, family, friends and all, and they would never assault someone unless they deserved it. We were forced to walk away. It was a truly disgusting situation. When my dad was in his early 20s, he was in a band staying in a hotel with his then girlfriend, and he woke up in the middle of the night to someone trying to sexually assault her. He pushed him off her, and they began to fight. He tells the story comically about how they fought through the hotel and out on the street. Long story short, the guy ends up stabbing my dad 11 times and leaves him to die on the sidewalk. A stranger walking his dog at 5 AM calls an ambulance and keeps on his way. They come, save my old man, re-inflate his lung, and he survives. The attacker gets caught and thrown in jail. They find out he had gotten out of jail 2 days prior to the attack for stabbing another person to death. Fast forward a few years again, and my dad is playing in a band in a bar owned by his buddy, and he spots the guy who stabbed him. He tells his friend who owns the bar that guy's gotta go, that's the guy who nearly killed him. The stabber gets kicked out and was found hanging the next day in his hotel room. But wait, there's more. 35 years later, my aunt moves to the city where we live and hits up some dating apps and some stuff and meets the officer who responded to my dad's attack when he was a rookie. So a lifetime later, my dad gets to shake the hand of the cop who helped save his life nearly 4 decades earlier. It's crazy. This friendship was short-lived, and it started in October of 2016. I was 24 and living in Mission Valley in San Diego at the time. I loved living in Mission Valley because it was pretty central to all the action in San Diego. 15 minutes from the beach and downtown, but not run down or overcrowded like other parts. The apartment I was living in was a nicer development, and luxury apartments were being built across the street. A pretty safe area. This morning I decided to go for a run to the Fenton Parkway shopping center. In it are a bunch of restaurants along with a Costco, IKEA, and the Mission Valley Library. This center also has a trolley stop. That's important. My plan that morning was to run to the center and treat myself to Starbucks as a reward for working out. I was really into running at the time. I remember exactly what I was wearing too. Running shorts and one of those t-shirt tanks with the sides cut off, where you can see the sports bra underneath. And I was wearing a pink sports bra, just doing my thing. I get there and am filling up my Starbucks when my dad calls me. I answer the phone and my dad fills me in that my younger brother Daniel was in the hospital. This wasn't shocking news to me. My parents had been debating about whether or not he should go in. I had said the night before I thought he should. Here's some crucial backstory, and why they were telling me this. Mental illness sucks, and it runs in my family. My mum had suffered from depression since I was born, and my little brother had been showing signs and symptoms of someone who was developing schizophrenia. My whole family was worried about him. And the next night, I had talked with my folks and advised that he goes to inpatient to at least be safe. I myself had had 2 episodes of extremely bad depression in my lifetime at this point, and they sucked. 2015 to 16 had been the worst year of my life and ultimately culminated in a hospital stay after months of refusing to be helped. This was in July of 2016, and it was a turning point for me. I got on medication, reconnected with family and friends after isolating for a year, and began rebuilding my life. It obviously wasn't that easy, but things turned around for the better. And by October of 2016, when this story takes place, I was happier than I had ever been before, loving life and waking up each day with actual confidence and eagerness to start the day. It sounds like a complete 180, and that's because it was. Cue a bipolar cycle that I wasn't even aware I was having. I have always struggled with social anxiety to a degree, even without depression. I get anxious and I'm too hyper-aware of myself while interacting with a group. I'm really friendly and hide it well, I think, but at the core I'm pretty introverted and reserved. I'm sure everyone experiences this to some degree, obviously, but I remember envying others where total social ease just seemed to come naturally. It never had for me. But in the fall of 2016 it was different. I suddenly had tons of confidence. Looking back at things, it's clear I was just hypomanic, but at the time I had no idea this was happening. I just felt like I was self-actualizing, and finally I could be the person I wanted to be. Confident, pretty, smart, outgoing, generous, kind. I had the words to say and could strike up a conversation with anyone. More than that, I wanted to. I felt like I was connecting with everyone and could be anyone's friend. I was really spiritual at this time too. I grew up a pastor's kid, so I've always had faith. But now, more than ever, I felt connected to God. And I was seeing signs of his existence everywhere, which is also a common trend in mania, but I didn't learn this until later. Now, manic thinking leads you to some extremely poor choices in judgment. A lot of people blow through finances and make reckless decisions while manic. Now back to the story. The phone call. While I'm on the phone with my dad, I kind of distractedly start walking around the center. I make my way over to the library parking lot, and there are a few people milling around because it hasn't opened yet. Honestly, I was in my own little world with this conversation and didn't really care if people would overhear me. Normally I hate talking on the phone in public, but Kelly 2.0 didn't care. I remember praying with my dad for my little brother's health and talking about how life is crazy because I had been in a similar situation just a few months back of feeling hopeless and suicidal. Totally oversharing in public, but whatever. I get off the call and get a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me, miss." I turn around. A short man in his 60s wearing a hat that says Navy on it was standing to my right. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Are you Christian?" "Why, yes," I said that I was. "I am too. My name's Tony. I just wanted to say that I am inspired by your faith and wanted to ask if it's okay if I pray for your brother as well." I was honestly so touched by the kindness of this random stranger. It was a bold thing to do, but at the time I remember being really inspired and moved that he would offer to pray with me. I actually thought he might be a pastor or something. He had that vibe. People talk about creeps and how they're dirty and classically creepy looking, but I didn't get that vibe from this guy. Also, it was 9 AM on a sunny October morning. With other people around, I didn't feel threatened in the least. He wasn't asking for anything. He's 5'5" and I'm 6 feet tall. I said sure, and we moved to a bench where he prays a short prayer, short but meaningful. During his prayer, at one point he puts his hand on my knee. I'm uncomfortable with this and was about to shift, but before I was about to, he removes it. I was too polite to say anything, and he continued praying. A lot of people in church will lay their hands on each other to pray as a sign of comfort, and so this isn't something setting off any huge alarm bells yet. But I remembered how I felt in that second vividly, exposed and uncomfortable. Now I look back on what I was wearing and feel sick. It was so painfully obvious why I was approached, but at the time I was so naively trusting in the goodness of strangers. After that, I kind of forgot how the conversation went exactly, but we basically launched into a super deep conversation about life. I would normally never be this open with a stranger, but I was hypomanically friendly, and he was really funny and well spoken. He tells me that he's a Navy veteran. I reveal that I used to work with vets as a nurse, and we bond over the shared experience. He says his wife Gloria was a nurse, but that she died in 2005, and after that things went downhill for him. I talked about my past year and how hard it had been, and he said he could definitely relate to struggle. He revealed that he was living in a shelter and goes to the library daily because he's studying to get back in school with some military-assisted program, and that he's only survived this long because of his faith. I forget what else we talked about in all honesty, but the conversation lasted for over an hour outside in the sunshine. This guy was incredibly insightful and eloquent. He had some really good insights into the Bible, and it was clear he knew his stuff. Before I leave, he asks if I wanted to stay in touch, and maybe even meet at the library again for a Bible study. I said sure. We exchanged email addresses, and I remember running home thinking how cool it was, a human connection, and meeting another strong Christian and all that. When I got home, I even wrote a blog post about it. I still have it now, and reading it in hindsight makes me cringe. 2 days later, I get an email from Tony. I open it up, and I'm surprised, because for how well spoken he was in person, this dude had the writing of a 10-year-old on AIM. All caps and run-on sentences. I still have the email. Hello. Didn't have time to write to you, but today I have. We need to see each other, and then can update me on your brother's doing. I miss you extremely and not ashamed to say it. The Lord has a word for you, and I want to tell you in person. Let's set up a date for this to happen. I will be at the library tomorrow, and we can meet here, okay? Contact me today if you see this. I'll be here until 3 p.m. I made a mental note to get back to him, but got distracted and forgot. The next day, he sent me a follow-up email. I emailed him back updating him on my brother, and said I would be free to meet up the following week. His responding email read as follows. I'm happy to hear that your brother is getting better, and I can meet you here at the library on Wednesday. It would be great to meet you again at 8:30. My life has been a pure blessing by knowing you and receiving your spiritual love. It only comes from God, as I do know I love you so very much. Hope things are going well for you, and I look forward to our next encounter. I'm homeless, but I have a home in the glory, so I don't fret about the place and the circumstances I found myself in. I had a dream about you the other night, and I'll tell you when I see you. It was awe-inspiring. Read Matthew 4:19, it will give you a clue. I reread his email, cringing at so many red flags. It makes me want to punch myself in the face. I'm a 24-year-old woman, not an 8-year-old girl. This guy is pushy. He would call me honey boo, love, and I know it's weird, but honestly at the time I truly dismissed it. I thought it was just the way he spoke as a term of endearment in a grandpa way. As an older guy, it was sort of what made him funny. I told my cousin Emily about Tony, and that we planned to meet, and she messaged me this. Kel, if you decide to do this, please meet in a public place and bring Scott. Scott is my older brother, who I lived with at the time. He's 2 years older and 6'7" and one of my best friends. You have a beautiful heart, and you don't know how pretty you are, and I don't want this guy getting any wrong ideas. I definitely remember laughing and thinking of this as a romantic thing. The dude was literally old enough to be my grandpa, and looked like a cousin of Gary Coleman. There's no way I was interested, but he obviously knows I'm not interested. We were meeting for a Bible study. But then my head returns to that moment at the library, and I think, I should just to be safe. Scott agrees to go with me. I didn't mention it to Tony that he'd be coming, because it was kind of a last-minute plan, and honestly, even though I enjoyed the meeting the first time, I also had a life and other things to get on with, so I didn't want to meet more than an hour just in case I had stuff to do. We get to Subway next to the library, and he's there waiting. I introduce him to my brother, and Tony cracks a few jokes about how he feels so short next to Scott. We all laughed and started talking. So nice to meet you, Scott. I hope to see you again soon. As in basically dismissing him. Scott and I exchanged glances, and Scott replies that he drove me here so he's going to join in. Tony doesn't skip a beat and says the more the merrier. I remember feeling relieved. We talked for about an hour, and it's truly another great conversation. We had Bible study and it was very engaging. Scott and I bought him a sandwich, and we had a lunch together. After we left, I asked Scott what he thought. Scott thought he was really nice. We both acknowledged the fact that Tony obviously thought he was meeting with just me, and how Scott felt like he was expected to leave at first. But we chalked it up to Tony just not expecting Scott to stay for Bible study. The emails he sent started increasing in intensity. After the Bible study, he sent me one thanking me, said my brother was a good man, and that any woman who finds him will be more than lucky. And he finished off the email signing, Your BFF, Tony. Rereading is so cringe, but I just chalked it up to him being lonely and genuinely looking for friendship. As the emails continued, for every one I would send, he would send at least 3 or 4. At one point, he requested a picture of me so that he could get an extra smile whenever he needed it. I felt straight weird sending one, but I swear to God I opened my phone booth, took a picture, and made some funny faces waving at the camera. Christ, I didn't tell anyone he asked for a picture because I knew it sounded textbook creepy, but I rationalized it in my head that he was an old lonely man and just looking for a friend. He told me he loved me like he would a daughter. I think we met up 4 more times. Tony lived out in Santee, but would take the trolley into Mission Valley. We met once more at Starbucks, but Scott couldn't make it. I really didn't have any qualms about it at this point. I didn't ask why he was homeless or how he got there, and he never volunteered the information, and to this day I wonder if I had asked what he would have said. It felt rude of me to pry, but I figured in due time he would open up. The second time I invited him to attend a church with Scott and I. The church we went to is made up of mostly young adults, and this Sunday night after the service, the church was hosting a barbecue and fellowship night. Tony definitely stood out, but he held his own, and during the event I saw him talking to a couple of the guys from church. I was glad. I wanted him to meet other Christian men and make more friendships because honestly, it was starting to get kind of suffocating. But he only communicated with me. On the drive home, I specifically remember him telling me that he introduced himself to Pastor Wes, our pastor, and he relayed the conversation they had. And remember this because it's important. November rolls around, and after our last meeting, Tony mentioned his birthday was coming up. I talked to Scott, and because I wanted Tony to feel like he had some sort of family on his birthday, as he told me he had no one, we agreed to invite him over for dinner. A super obvious PSA that probably no one needs to hear: do not invite a homeless stranger into your home no matter how nice they seem. Dear God, I was genuinely trying to make the guy feel welcomed and loved, and it was because of the stigma of homelessness that I wanted to do the opposite and show him that I wasn't afraid to let him see where I lived. Homelessness is dehumanizing, and I wanted for him to feel like a person on his birthday. Scott was way more hesitant about letting him come over. I advocated for Tony, and eventually Scott agreed. I told him to bring his laundry and we would wash it for him, and let him wash up beforehand in my bathroom. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I also invited my best friend Grace and her boyfriend Robert. I did the cooking and had asked him what his favorite meal was. Steak with tons of caramelized onion and butter, salad with Russian dressing, mashed potatoes and a Dutch apple pie. I went to Ralph's and blew $80 on the ingredients to make it. Tony was super grateful and said it was the best meal he'd had since his wife passed away. I mentioned that I had a psychiatrist appointment the next day, and Tony had gotten to one of those Obama phones and would call everyone once in a while. To be honest, when he got the phone, I was honestly kind of wary about it, because he now had another way to stay in touch with me, and it was kind of draining trying to keep up with him. Sunday rolls around and Tony joins Scott and I for church again. After a big group of us decide to go to this Mediterranean place, everyone orders, and by the time we get seated it's me, Scott, Tony and our friend Brandon, and my friend Julia at one end of the table. Tony and Brandon get talking. I wasn't really paying that much attention because I was chatting with Julia. I had paid for Tony's meal, as he originally tried to order some catfish dish, which was literally the most expensive item on the menu. It sounded disgusting for me, but I was happy to do it. The restaurant was out of it, and I remember this distinctly. When the waitress came back to the table to tell Tony they were out, he made a big deal about it, just kind of abrasive, sighing like he was personally offended, and was sort of demeaning to the waitress when she offered up other options. I remember feeling both apologetic towards the waitress and honestly kind of intimidated by Tony. Once he got the replacement dish, he was back to joking around and being friendly. I just chalked it up to him being tired and hungry, again overlooking all the red flags. After dinner I offered to drive Tony home, and I did so alone. When he wasn't at the shelter, he said he lived on a bench way out in Santee. I remember this night it kind of started to rain and I felt bad for him, and he had a way of making you feel bad for him too, for being homeless, both in his emails and in person. Driving out to the bench in the cold, I felt both a nagging obligation to offer him a dry place to sleep and the discerning feeling like he was expecting me to offer. I had previously considered it, but both Scott and I discussed it, and we didn't want to invite him over to spend the night even once, for fear of setting up a pattern or expectation in the future. I'm nearing the bench, and he makes it clear he's unhappy and tired of being homeless. I'm so sick of this. You're the only good thing in my life, Kelly. We chat for a bit. I try to encourage him, and we make plans for me to pick him up for church next week. Right before he exits the car, he leans over and gives me a quick kiss goodbye. On the lips. I am definitely uncomfortable with that. That is way crossing the line. I immediately felt weird and violated. I kind of stammer out a goodbye, pull out of the parking lot and leave Tony standing there, watching me as I go. Driving home, I felt gross. I'm also now uncomfortable, as it dawned on me that I just drove a man 40 years older than me, and I barely even know the area with no one else around at night. These are huge no-nos that up until this point, I was oblivious to because I was hypomanic. I just thought I was making a positive impact on Grandpa Tony's life. I get home and was probably there 30 minutes when Scott gets a text from Brandon. I hadn't told Scott about the kiss at this point, and Brandon was saying how it was extremely unlikely that he was in the Navy for only 8 years and achieved the rank of Master Chief, as it takes a lifetime to get. That he was probably a pathological liar, because some of the other things he mentioned is that he took someone out by striking pressure points because he did jujitsu. Jujitsu only teaches grappling, not pressure points. And that he also got a PhD from Yale in neuropsychology. The lies were just stacking up, and it was pretty obvious it wasn't adding up. I have this gut feeling, a sinking one, and Scott and I talk about it, and perhaps he's just overcompensating for the fact he's homeless. He goes by Tony, but I knew his full name from his email address. I hadn't bothered to look him up before. He told me he has no social media accounts, and didn't know the first thing about setting one up. I remember teasing him that he should join the 21st century, and never searched for him because there was no reason to. That's when I type his name into the Google search bar, and the first thing that pops up makes me want to puke. It's a mugshot for Megan's Law, and the Tony in the picture is terrifying. This man is a violent, registered sex offender. I instantly feel sick to my stomach and terrified. I had been with this guy an hour ago, alone by myself out in the middle of nowhere, Santee. The next result under his mugshot? A Facebook profile, the one he said he never had. I can't stop myself from clicking on it. I wanted to know everything about this guy. All he has is one profile picture and 1,520 friends, all of them young women about my age. When I go to Instagram and search his name, he's there. The only people he follows are Instagram models in lingerie, women with bare asses and huge boobs and BDSM stuff. He has 20 followers, and every single one is a sex-related chat for money type of account. I call my cousin and aunt, who advised me to report this guy to the police. He hadn't done anything against the law though, really, and I feel both gross and conflicted of what to do. He's preying upon young women, and I was stupid enough to fall for it. I called up Pastor Wes, because I knew he had spoken with Tony and Scott, and I was kind of at odds at what to do. "Sup, Kelly?" I explained the situation, since Wes is at least familiar with who Tony is since they spoke. "Oh, him. Yeah, I vaguely remember him." Wes meets a lot of people every Sunday, so I assumed he just forgot about him. I reminded him about the conversation he had with Tony. "Kelly, I've never spoken with him or even interacted with him. The only reason I know who he is and remember him is because he was very rude to Monica at the barbecue because she wouldn't let him in the kitchen." Monica is Wes' wife. Holy hell. Tony had told me they spoke, and word for word relayed the conversation to me, but it never happened. Instantly, everything had a new meaning and an extra sinister twist to it. I felt both incredibly violated and just so mind-blown that someone could lie that effortlessly straight to my face without missing a beat. I didn't even ask him about Wes. Tony is the one who brought him up. I thought about all the conversations we had, and now I know this guy was just saying whatever he felt like in order to gain my trust, which he did. I let this guy into my home, let him shower in my shower, showed him pictures of my family. Jesus. Long story short, after discovering this and talking to my friends and family, I reported Tony to the police and sent him an email explaining I didn't want any contact with him anymore. I still had some of his laundry at my house, and I didn't want to give him any excuse to come get it. In the email I told him his clothes were clean and he could pick them up from the church, but to not contact me anymore. I was hoping that would be the end of it. I blocked his number, but hadn't on Gmail. Email after email he sent me dozens, pleading to explain himself, but I didn't take the bait. My friend who actually works for Gavin DeBecker, who wrote the book The Gift of Fear, and that's all about predators who use manipulation to take advantage of you, advised me the following: to never respond to a stalker. Even if you ignore 5,000 messages and respond to only one, all that has taught the stalker is that he needs to bother you 500 times until he gets a response. The email started off kindly enough, and then turned accusatory. He actually threatened his life in one. I let the police know, and I screenshotted a few of them. They were non-stop. And then I blocked him. For the next few days I was terrified to be in my apartment alone. I didn't go anywhere by myself. I bought a mace and a taser online, and any time I needed to drive anywhere or return home, I would call Scott or a friend so they could walk me to and from my car if I was by the apartment. Thankfully, Thanksgiving break was the next week, so I had a reprieve of the paranoia when Scott and I were home visiting family. When we returned to San Diego, a few days passed, and by this point it had been 2 weeks since I blocked Tony. No word or sight from him during this time, and although I was extremely anxious to be home alone by myself, with each passing day I grew a little bit more relieved. If he hadn't come by at this point, he probably got the message to leave me alone. It was December 4th. Scott had made plans to visit LA the upcoming weekend to visit friends, and I had obligations in San Diego, and I felt okay to stay here by myself while he went out of town. The night before, Grace and Robert were hosting a party to celebrate Robert's graduation from EMT school. Knowing we'd be drinking and having a good time, my friend Michaela planned to spend the night, and we would Uber home there together. The night was a blast, and we got home at 2 a.m, buzzed and happy. The next morning I made her breakfast, and she left shortly after. 10 minutes after she left, I heard a knock at the door. I was praying it was Michaela, realizing she forgot something, but had this huge knot in my stomach as I approached the peephole. I look out and scream internally. It's Tony. Thank God the door was locked, because even though I didn't answer or say a word, Tony knew I was home. My car was in the driveway. He didn't say anything, just pounded on the door, relentlessly knocking. There's a window if you walk around the door where you can see into the apartment, and even though it was closed, it freaked me out that he would walk around and see me. I ran into Scott's bathroom, which is the farthest thing away from the front door, with a kitchen knife, my mace and my taser, and called 911. I can still hear him pounding on the door. I frantically explained to 911 the situation, and they said they would send someone over. I hang up and FaceTime Grace and Robert to let them know what was going on, and they head in my car to the apartment. While this is happening, the knocking stops, and I'm praying he's giving up and left. Then I hear a crash on my balcony. I can't see out, and there's no way in hell I'm leaving the bathroom, but I'm positive this guy has climbed over the railing and was now trying to get in through the sliding glass door. Was the balcony door locked? I was 99% sure, because I'd been vigilant and paranoid about locking the doors, but having coming buzzed the night before, I couldn't remember if I'd even checked before going to bed. That 1% of uncertainty was terrifying. I called 911 again in a panic, explaining that this man is now trying to break in. The dispatcher asked if he had weapons, and I honestly didn't know. The guy is dangerous, cunning, and he told me himself he carries a switchblade on the street for protection. Out of all the lies he told me, I do believe he was in the military and probably had at least some sort of combat training. The dispatcher tells me to stay on the line until the police arrive. I can't hear anything, and I don't know if that's because he's given up or if it's because he opened the door and made it inside my home. In that moment, I honestly thought I was going to die. I thought Tony was going to break in, abuse me, and kill me. My mind broke in fear. I remember frantically praying over and over 1,000,000 times, and I heard a loud pounding on the front door again. It was the police. I was so terrified that it could be Tony pretending to be a police officer, but the 911 dispatcher assured me that it was indeed the police. I open up the door in a frenzy. There are 4 cops standing there. 2 are next to my door, and the other two were a little off to the side with Tony. I literally had a breakdown seeing him. I just started sobbing. I was freaking out and inconsolable. The cops took him away, and the main officer was extremely kind and comforting. He gave me instructions on how to file a restraining order. Having that experience and becoming so paranoid about Tony triggered full-blown mania in me. I couldn't sleep after all for 2 nights straight, and I spent the night at Grace's and posted on social media constantly, messaging everyone. I started believing I had survived death and came up with these mind-blowing observations on the other side. Looking back, it's so embarrassing I put that stuff on Facebook, but that's my own story. My family has already been concerned, and this was the tipping point. I got admitted to hospital and ended up staying there for 2 weeks, having become full-blown psychotic. Once I was more stabilized, the hospital issued me a day pass so that I could get my restraining order from the court downtown. I had to face Tony in court to do this, and it was awful. I was praying he wouldn't show, but he did. Brandon and Scott testified, and then it was Tony's turn to speak. The guy straight out lied to the judge's face that this was a mutual relationship, and that I was the one in love with him, and that I had changed my mind, and the only reason he went by my house that day was to pick up his laundry. I didn't even have it, and he knew it, and knew that I knew it. God, watching this guy lie and turn on the charm was disgusting, and having to sit in the chair trembling. My turn to speak, and I present the judge with printouts of every single email he sent me, his Facebook account, and Instagram account, and all the young women. Tony was shocked that I had evidence. She threw the book at him, and it felt like something from Law and Order. I swear. She gave him the whole speech to never take advantage of a young woman again, or he would have to answer to her. God, it was sweet, sweet justice. He wasn't allowed to be within 100 yards of me and was ordered to stay away from the Fenton Parkway Center. I never saw him again, and I've moved since. The paranoia after lasted a long time. From this experience, I now know that the mood swings I was having the past year was manic depression, and that I have bipolar disorder. It sucks, and right now I'm back in the sinkhole of depression. I only found out after that one of his offences on his rap sheet listed lewd and lascivious acts with a minor of under 14. He had graduated from preying on children to preying on young women. At one point I had shown Tony a video on my phone of my 4-year-old cousin Charlotte singing Happy Birthday that Emily had sent me because it was adorable and hysterical. In the video, Charlotte was dancing around in her underwear, and I remember Tony watching it with a huge smile, commenting, "What a precious little angel." It makes me physically sick to think about, and I hope to never see him again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed these stories. Truly some really scary situations. The saga of Tony, I thought, was a fantastic story, and a great lesson to be learnt about trusting strangers and why, well, you probably shouldn't do it. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to let me know. And what do you think about this format? Shorter stories in the rains, you know, the typical 40 to 50 minute long video, but with the rain sound effects. I personally really enjoyed it. If this is something you'd like to see more of, let me know and I will probably do it again. But until next time, huge thank you as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. To get some cool perks for signing up, all that you need to do is follow the links in the description. I'm actually going to hit up my members and patrons with some exclusive hospital stories, so if you are so inclined on checking those out, you know what to do. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.